Coming up on Need to Know, if you've been feeling more stressed and fatigued than usual, there could be a reason for it that you haven't considered yet. Blame it on this year's election. We'll find out to what degree this election year has been psychologically and politically damaging and how we can move forward. And in the midst of a divisive election year, we find a reason to celebrate. Diversity, that is. How a local TV program is unifying our culturally rich community. That's just ahead. Stay with us. Need to Know starts right now. For some of you watching Need to Know right now, the last thing you want to hear about is the election. The overabundance of campaign attack ads, mailers, social media arguments, TV interviews turned into angry rants, robocalls, and knocks on your door may have you throwing in the towel and wishing at this point it was 2017. I recently hit the streets of Rochester to see if people would open up and share how they're feeling about this election year, in particular the presidential election. Here's a look at what residents had to say.
The choices are terrible. The choices are terrible. I mean, it's like one side don't know what the other one want to do, the other side don't know what the other one want to do. You know, the candidates to me they're not very good, either one of them. But I'm going to vote. I'm not going to say who I'm going to vote for. But to me, I just don't like the candidates this year.
I'm a little discouraged and disappointed. I haven't done a ton of research on the candidates because I don't really believe in either of them. I don't really agree with their policies and what they're up against for our country.
Do you think on election day you're going to go out and vote?
I will vote, just not for one of the primary candidates.
I think the issues that matter to me are the economy and technology. I think both major candidates do a poor job of addressing the technology side. We've got one person who seems to be tweeting at 3 in the morning, and that's about his understanding of tech. And the other gal, she wants to break encryption. There's not a lot of talk about how we could use technology to grow the economy in America. Instead, they're bickering about borders. They're bickering about, all sorts of things that don't matter as much to me.
As far as this thing going on with Trump and Clinton, I disagree with both parties. I really do.
Talk about why.
Why is because when you talk about personal lives, they talking about her personal life, she talking about his personal life. I don't care about your personal life. Let's talk about what we need to do as one to make Rochester, America, all these countries just as one, build all over again and start over. Because right now, we so far in debt, we worried about what's going on in this country and ain't worried about what's going on in this country.
I just feel like it's just a election filled with just meanness and just not really issues. It's really talking more about personal attacks and that type of thing. And I just wish that we would focus more on the issues.
My hope is that we can improve our stature in the world. We've spent the past 8 years digging out from some things that we did that I think hurt our reputation with the world. And I think right now we're in a situation, you've got Russia, you've got China. These could be allies, these could be partners. Right now, we're butting heads with them. That's difficult. So my hope is that we could improve from that. My worry is very much the same way, depending on where the election goes. We could look like the fool.
There was a common theme among everyone I spoke with, including those so disheartened by the election they didn't want to appear on camera. That theme, frustration and fear. In fact, the American Psychological Association recently found that 52% of American adults polled report that the 2016 election is a very or somewhat significant source of stress. Is this fairly typical of every major election? And how damaging has this been politically and psychologically for people like you and me? At the table for this discussion is Dr. Eric Kane, Chair of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Rochester Medical Center. Jody Amon, a psychotherapist and author, and Timothy Nealon, Professor and Chairperson of History and Political Science at Nazareth College. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So I see this is the cover of the USA Today earlier this week, and it says, "Is it over yet?" And many Americans have had enough. And Eric, I'm going to give this to you first. Why are we so affected by this? I mean, and is this frustration and stress something reminiscent of elections past, or are we at a heightened level of anxiety and stress at this point?
Well, I think there are several reasons, and certainly I'll
defer to the political science leader on one of them, but it's very clear that there's a level of personal attack, personal aggression, breaking down barriers that we often think of as respectful and honoring other people, that we've seen this year that we've never seen before. I've been following elections since 1960 and never saw something as really aggressive, as really hostile as we've seen. And so this hostility spreads all over the place. The other thing which I think, I certainly know I've experienced, and I suspect others have as well, is a kind of sadness and resignation. And that was also evident in the pieces we heard. A sadness about what's happened to our country, a resignation about a sense that we don't have any control over it. And the idea that election is a time when we make choices, that we make determinations about the future of the world around us and our country, in a sense that, well, what kind of choices do we really have? So I think that this is different. Certainly there have always been partisan advocates, and certainly there have been dirty tricks, and we look back over the years, even in recent memory, we've had people who've had dirty tricks. We obviously a presidency that was overturned based on that. But on the other side of it, this has been a kind of personal damage election. And at the personal damage level, it is then fed into other people's relationships.
And you mentioned personal damage, and I've read that there has been political damage with this election, and there have been blanket statements supporting that. So Tim, are there concrete examples of how the past nearly 600 days have been or have had negative effects on our election process?
Well, absolutely. The very fact that, at least on both sides of the spectrum, you've got people saying the system is rigged, right? You've got one major candidate who said that they would not define the election as won by their opponent. Trump said, look, frankly, if I win, I won't denounce the election, but otherwise I might say it's rigged. That hurts the democratic process. That's very dangerous. And already they're setting up the idea for a post-election, maybe legal challenges or certainly political challenges. I've already heard some Republican senators talking about impeachment to Hillary Clinton if she gets elected based upon the latest dump from the FBI and these 650,000 emails that were discovered on Weiner's laptop. So no, I think there are very concrete examples of how this election, as opposed to others, really is somewhat different because of the bitterness and the politics. Although I'm not sure these candidates created it, I think they reflect it. I think a lot of this is coming out of the social media spectrum and the incredible polarization in our American politics. Over the last 25 years, Democrats have become much more liberal and progressive, and Republicans much more conservative. And that has led to people saying things like, you know what, I don't even think that they understand the basic facts, and rejecting. And then people go on social media or news media and they say, oh, well, this is what I believe. So confirmation bias comes in and they don't even listen to the other side. So there's so many choices, but really very few options for these people who are looking at the exact same media.
Jody, what specifically is it about this election that you have found is fueling anxiety that some people are feeling? And I do want to point out that the Stress in America survey done by the American Psychological Association found that significant stress is being felt across the aisle, across party lines. But are there specific events in this election cycle that you've seen that you would say have triggered some internal negative responses for individuals?
Well, of course, a lot of women who've been sexually assaulted in their life have overwhelming response to the hot mic and the other women coming forward, because in a way it feels like what happened to them, which is pretty fragile in the beginning because they feel unworthy or they feel guilty about it, shame about it. They feel like it was allowed, which is very confusing because they've been fighting against that idea all their lives since it happened to them. And so this caused a lot of PTSD symptoms for these women having this come out.
I'd actually add one other thing. If you go back to the Republican primaries, I actually think they were in part a turning point, because we had one candidate who started, in essence, labeling people, giving them nicknames, bullying them, in a way that the candidates weren't prepared to respond to and didn't know how to respond to. In part because it broke the decorum, if you would. You know, you can stretch it fairly far, and we saw the Democratic debates having some of that stretch. But you had a singular candidate, Donald Trump, who really was loading it on in ways that others had never dealt with before. Except, you know, maybe when they were growing up and dealing with bullies, and some of them weren't expecting this. And so, in addition to what Jody's saying, which I very much agree with, is this whole sense that the old rules don't matter anymore. And rules are helpful to us. They help us understand where we go. And all the traditions that we had around the elections have sort of been shattered.
One young woman we spoke to, we saw in the video, she said that she doesn't like either presidential candidate, and so she's decided not to do thorough research on either one, and to look into the issues and the policies that they support. And I'm curious, can this indifference in this case be detrimental or helpful, whether personally or politically, considering how toxic this election has been?
Well, from a political standpoint, there's nothing new there. I'm sorry to say that we've known for 100 years that voters actually don't spend a great deal of time looking at things like party platforms or social policies or economic policies. In fact, they use heuristics or shortcuts to figure out which candidate they like better based upon certain styles of leadership. Yes, your tie matters, or the way you wear your hair to some voters. So that doesn't surprise me at all, and I think that that's probably going to continue in the future. What she's saying, though, the disengagement, that's a problem, because I think turnout could be affected by different communities within the United States. And then, of course, that feeling of disempowerment and alienation from the political process can only make things worse in the long run, because then people don't pay attention to the rules. People don't understand the rules to begin with because they're not studying them. And then when things turn out and it seems like it was, you know, something they had no control over, that can alienate them. That may lead them not to be involved in the political process in the future. That's damaging to our democracy.
And we certainly had low voter turnout in the United States, even in presidential elections when we look back, compared to other countries. I traveled to other countries, and the idea that we would have a 60% or less voter turnout in some of these elections, and certainly the intermediate elections and the off years even lower, is just really stunning in other parts of the world, where they just think, well, this is your right, this is your opportunity.
I think that disengagement encourages powerlessness, and that's what stresses people out the most. Is like when we have a responsibility to something but no control over it, we feel powerless, we feel helpless, and that's where the stress and the anxiety come from about our future, about our trust in the world, about our trust in our leaders.
What tips would you have for people? I have seen posts on Facebook, I have seen the hostility back and forth, I've heard about the division between family members and friends when it comes to this election. What would you say to people who are feeling that stress and that anxiety to help them move forward?
That's really interesting. We have seen a lot of people lose friends. Sometimes it's in the same couple. They have different opinions about what's going on. And people are stressed out. They feel really bad. They love this person, but they have such bad disagreements. It's so impassioned. And so I would say to those people to find a common ground again, outside the election at least. There's always something that we disagree upon and always something that we agree upon. And so there's always something to find, you know, connect around some values that are in common. And I think that's what people have to get back to right now.
Yeah, well, I think it depends on the relationships. You know, of course, we always have the example, I always use them, the European sports fans who go to football or soccer games in Europe, and they take out sticks and they beat each other up. And they don't know each other at all. They don't, you know, they've never been together, and we've even had homicides in those situations based on these stereotypes. And so I always think about people having to find ways of overcoming stereotypes, and that's to get to know each other, to be together, to appreciate that there are qualities that they do share, as you say. I'm actually kind of worried about some of the situations where they're family members, because a lot of people are wounded. A lot of people who know each other are wounded, and the disrespectfulness of this election in particular sort of breaks the rules. You know, it's okay to be angry with someone as long as you're not disrespectful. In this election, it's okay to be disrespectful and then hate them too.
All right. We're out of time, but I appreciate the tips and the valuable conversation. And a special thank you to my guests for joining me for this conversation. It is less than a week away from Election Day. Stay with WXXI News for local and national election coverage and analysis. That's on television and radio beginning at 8 p.m. on November 8th. Also, we'll have election results and reaction online. That's at WXXInews.org. It was President Jimmy Carter who said, "We have become not a melting pot, but a beautiful mosaic. Different people, different beliefs, different yearnings, different hopes, different dreams." Enlightening the Rochester community on such differences among our rich ethnic and cultural environment is part of the mission of a television program for Rochester City 12 produced by WXXI. It's called Cultural Expressions. It's all about promoting diversity by sharing the cultural history of Rochester and surrounding areas. Take a look.
Where did jazz come from? If you ask cats like Wynton Marsalis in New Orleans, and some folks say New York, my opinion of how jazz became jazz is, jazz in its infancy came out of the South. From ragtime, Dixieland, etc., it came out of the South. After World War I ended, World War I gave black people opportunities, either in the war or in war industries to make money, and it was a migration from the South north to northern cities, Chicago, etc., New York, and for whatever reason, Harlem became the U.S. capital of black people. So a great many folks came to Harlem, and they brought that sound of music to Harlem. That music, it evolved during the Harlem Renaissance, and Duke Ellington was a big part of that. And jazz, essentially, in my opinion, is nothing more than you had African Americans taking a European music, instruments, and applying their African rhythms and sounds with these European instruments, creating this jazz. There are black folks all over the world, but jazz happened in America. So it's an American thing, a black American thing. We can all enjoy, obviously, but it was a matter of cultivating African rhythms and sounds with European instruments.
And it is about improvisation, in which there's tremendous freedom in what it is you play. So it's a wonderful example of American democracy in action, which strikes me as terribly important because it was invented, if you will, by people who had been enslaved.
When I first run away and I stepped over that freedom line, ooh, the sun had a different shine to it. It seemed like the sky was different and the air was different. But there was one thing. I didn't have my family with me. So I had to keep going back to get my family and whoever else that wanted to come. And one thing I had to tell my passengers, I say, you can't go back. You can't never go back. If you're on with me, you must go all the way. You must keep on going. If you're tired, keep going. Sometimes your feet get raw, but you got to keep going. And sometimes you're sick and feel like you can't go on, but you got to keep going.
Aunt Harriet was born our mentor. They called her Little Minty. And they did not realize that she was going to be this woman that she is today. And we are, as a family, going to try to keep her name alive.
Wherever we can find an individual like Ms. Daniels who can give us insights and concerns, appreciation for the legacy that they are a part of, that helps community. And we should salute those persons for wanting to do that in order to make real and more profound the positive things that people like Harriet, Mother Moses, Tubman was able to do.
but we are a force in this world that is acknowledged, that is enjoyed. And I love that. I love that feeling of being connected to something bigger, whether it's going back to visit, whether it's that foundation of the importance of family. I love having such a strong component when it comes to my identity.
Music is incredibly important. Like with any culture, it tells the stories of the community, and it's representative of the cultural influences that make up Hispanic culture. Because in the music you can hear the influence from Spain, the influence from Africa, as well as from the Native Americans in that part of the world that help shape the music and the food. So that's why the food and the music is important.
Food, music, dance. And it probably goes in that order.
It's exciting to be part of this rich history.
Joining me in the studio to talk about the benefits for all when we take the time to understand and celebrate diversity on a community level is WXXI manager and producer of City 12, Tiege Jenkins, author and journalist Julio Saenz, and vice president at the University of Rochester, Paul Burgett. It's great to have all of you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Tiege, as director and producer of Cultural Expressions, I want to start with you and ask, at what point did you realize that there, was a need for this type of programming in our community, but also the desire for this type of programming? Because I would think that would make it successful.
Definitely. It's a passion of mine. I've always loved and appreciated foreign culture, language, the music, and the stories of people that were in ethnic groups that were outside of my own. And so I took that passion. I just felt like it was just time. You know, there's always a need for us to be more open-minded and to get to know each other. And I think that the more that we connect with people, the more it shows us that we're not so different. Yeah. And the more that we understand each other, the more tolerant that we are of our cultural communities.
Paul, the idea of celebrating culture and embracing diversity is not new in our society. This is not a new concept, but in a society that thrives on what's new and the next best thing, how do we keep cultural traditions alive while taking into account the history that we're making every day?
You know, I was really impressed by what Tiege had to say, and when Tiege contacted me to ask if I would participate in this, I leapt at the chance to do it. As a person of African descent, I teach the subject of the music of Black Americans. I'm a musician, and I teach the subject of the music of Black Americans, the history of jazz, and the music of Black Americans at the university. And I do it with a relatively small group of people, my students. And so I saw this as an opportunity to expand an audience about American heritage, American values, American treasures, because it is in our diversity that we grow strong. Diversity makes us stronger. And so sharing our cultural sacraments, if you will, I think is a very important responsibility for those of us who are able to do it. And so I think Cultural Expressions is an opportunity to share more broadly with a larger audience what some of these if you will, cultural sacraments, in my case, music are. And it goes beyond music. I mean, there's clearly an historical and sociological and anthropological dimension to it that helps us to understand who we are as Americans. And so I think it's very important to look for ways to expand the opportunity for greater numbers of people to know about this.
Mm-hmm. Julio, in our fast-paced, forward-thinking age of distraction, is it challenging to get the younger generation tied in and to celebrate their history more so than the older generations?
Sure, I think it's always a challenge to get folks to think outside of the immediacy of the day they're living in, and that's especially true for youth because, I mean, most generations try to define themselves by separation from the previous generation. Yeah. I think, interestingly enough, in the Hispanic culture, it's not as defined and it's not as important, and I think, as in some other cultures. So there's still, I think, more of a continuity with the previous generations, with the culture, with the music. If you look at salsa's been around since, in one way or form, since really the 50s and even earlier. And if you turn on the radio now and you listen to what young folks are listening to, yes, they're listening to reggaeton and other things, but they still listen to salsa. There's not like this immediate break that I have to be separate than what was done in the past in order to be different or myself.
How have you all seen this program, Cultural Expressions, open communication lines or create a deeper understanding or serve as a bridge between different sectors of our community?
I've had lots of people speak to me after I appeared on the show to tell me from a variety of places, from Wegmans when I'm shopping or Tops when I'm shopping, to JCC where I work out, people in my neighborhood, people on the university campus who have seen the show. And it's always sort of startled me. I was really quite pleased to realize how widespread the audience is for cultural expressions. And so that's how I've seen it, and I've been pleasantly surprised that that has been the case.
Now, to go back to, you mentioned getting youth engaged. I'd have to say that a lot of people that are in the millennial generation have attached to this show and have spoken very favorably of it. We've gotten, like, the demographics for the viewers are just, they're wide and they're broad. And I think that that's something, it makes me feel really proud that people are attaching to this program. They're engaged with the stories that they're hearing, and I think that we see so much similarity. Like, everybody can relate to family, and everyone can relate to music. Those are things that are just, they're things that we're all somehow connected to. And to put those things, to tie them in with culture, it was just a unique perspective that I think a lot of people have found refreshing. That's what I hear, and just a lot of really great feedback.
You know, education is the key. I'm an educator, and so that is the platform that I use to launch ideas. And what I have discovered is that there is a real hunger, especially in this day and age, where I worry sometimes that we're going to entertain ourselves to death, where the entertainment medium has captured our attention and our pocketbooks. And
I'm sorry to cut you off, Paul.
Sure.
I'm so
No, go
sorry
ahead.
because we were out of time. But I want to thank you all for being here. And a special thank you to my guests. Please be sure to check out Cultural Expressions. You can learn more about the history of the Rochester region, hear untold stories, and also discover upcoming events. Go to the program's Facebook page for the latest videos. That's facebook.com/culturalexpressionstv. And that's it for this edition of Need to Know, Rochester's news magazine. I'm your host, Helen B. and Duty Hofer. Thank you for watching tonight, throughout the weekend, and online at WXXInews.org. I'll see you back here on WXXI TV for PBS Election Day coverage on November 8th. Have a great night.